A billionaire's daughter spent her entire life searching for one thing money could never buy: love. Not the kind that appears in magazine photos, not the kind that arrives with expensive gifts and perfect smiles, real love. The kind that stays when there is nothing to gain. But after years of heartbreak, betrayal, and men who seemed more interested in her fortune than her heart, she came to a terrifying conclusion. The richer she became, the harder it was to know who was telling the truth. Then one day, her dying father gave her a challenge that sounded completely insane. He told her to disappear, to walk away from the private jets, walk away from the penthouses, walk away from the billionaire lifestyle she had always known, and become invisible. 6 months later, she was standing alone in a janitor's uniform, mopping the marble floors of the very company she secretly owned. Nobody recognized her. Nobody respected her. Nobody knew that the quiet woman pushing a cleaning cart through the hallway controlled more wealth than most countries would see in a lifetime. And that was exactly what she wanted. Because somewhere inside that building was a man she hoped would love her for who she was. Not for her money, not for her last name, not for the billions waiting in her bank account, just her. What she didn't know was that someone else had already started watching. Someone who had uncovered pieces of a secret that was never supposed to leave the shadows. And before this story is over, one person will lose a fortune, one person will gain everything, and an entire company will witness a revelation so shocking that employees will talk about it for years. Because this isn't just the story of a billionaire heiress pretending to be a cleaner. It's the story of what happens when people show you who they really are the moment they believe you have nothing. And trust me, the truth hiding inside this company was far more valuable than any billion-dollar inheritance. Before we go deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The morning Amelia Sterling became invisible began like any other day inside Sterling Global. Employees hurried through the revolving doors carrying coffee cups and laptops. Executives prepared for meetings worth millions of dollars. Phones rang, elevators opened and closed, deadlines loomed, profits were discussed, careers were built and destroyed. And standing quietly among them was a woman nobody noticed. Dressed in a plain janitor's uniform, Amelia slowly pushed a cleaning cart across the lobby floor. People walked around her, past her, through her space as if she wasn't even there. Then it happened. A senior executive stepped backward while checking messages on his phone and slammed directly into her. Cleaning supplies rattled. The cart shifted. The executive looked up. For a brief second, their eyes met. Amelia expected a simple apology. Instead, he frowned. "Watch where you're going." Then he walked away. Just like that, no apology, no concern, no second glance. Amelia lowered her eyes and said nothing. Because arguing would ruin everything. What that executive didn't know was that the woman he had just dismissed owned 51% of the company. What nobody in that building knew was that Amelia Sterling wasn't there to clean floors. She was there to uncover the truth. And in less than 6 months, a man working somewhere inside those walls would unknowingly fall in love with her. But when her real identity finally came to light, he would face a choice that could either make him a billionaire or cost him the woman he loved forever. And before Amelia could discover who truly cared about her, someone else would discover exactly who she was, and that person had plans of their own. For the rest of that morning, Amelia Sterling continued pushing her cleaning cart through the towering headquarters of Sterling Global while pretending not to notice the things she had never been able to see from the executive floor. For most of her life, employees had adjusted their behavior the moment she entered a room. Conversations became more professional. Smiles appeared instantly. People stood a little straighter. But now, hidden behind the identity of Amy Collins, she was witnessing a version of the company that few executives ever experienced. She watched managers speak harshly to junior staff before turning around and acting charming in front of senior leadership. She saw hardworking employees receive little recognition while others took credit for accomplishments they hadn't earned. Every day revealed another layer of reality. Some discoveries disappointed her, others surprised her, but one thing became increasingly clear. Her father's enrichment was working. Richard Sterling had always believed that a person's character revealed itself when there was nothing to gain. Throughout his career, he had built an empire by studying people. He understood numbers, markets, and negotiations, but he understood human nature even better. Before Amelia began this unusual mission, he had warned her about something important. He told her that the truth might be uncomfortable. Some people she admired might disappoint her. Some people she overlooked might earn her respect. If she wanted genuine answers, she would need to accept whatever she discovered. Amelia remembered those words often as she moved quietly through the building. Every interaction became another piece of a much larger puzzle. 3 days after the incident with the executive, Amelia encountered Ethan Carter again. This time, she was cleaning a conference room after a lengthy project meeting. Most of the participants had already left, eager to start their weekends. Empty coffee cups sat scattered across the table. Presentation notes remained on chairs. Amelia worked quietly, assuming she was alone, when she heard footsteps approaching behind her. Turning around, she found Ethan gathering abandoned papers from the room. "You know, everyone else usually leaves this mess for someone else to handle," he said with a smile. Amelia laughed softly. "That's usually how it works." Ethan shook his head. "Never made much sense to me. It wasn't a remarkable conversation. In fact, it lasted less than 2 minutes." But what caught Amelia's attention wasn't what Ethan said. It was how naturally he spoke to her. There was no trace of condescension, no forced politeness, no attempt to impress anyone. He treated her exactly the same way he treated every other employee. For Amelia, that had become increasingly rare. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. Sometimes it happened in hallways, sometimes in the company cafeteria, sometimes during late evenings when most employees had already gone home. Each interaction revealed a little more about Ethan Carter. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't ambitious in the way many corporate employees were. He cared about doing good work, helping his team, and returning home at a reasonable hour. While others constantly competed for promotions and recognition, Ethan seemed focused on something different: stability, integrity, purpose. One afternoon, Amelia found herself sitting alone in the cafeteria during a quiet period between lunch and dinner. Most tables sat empty. She was reviewing notes she had secretly compiled about company culture when Ethan approached carrying a tray. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. Amelia hesitated briefly before nodding. That simple lunch turned into a conversation lasting nearly an hour. For the first time since beginning her undercover role, Amelia found herself genuinely enjoying someone's company. Ethan spoke about growing up in a small town. He shared stories about his mother, who had sacrificed everything to raise him after his father passed away unexpectedly. He talked about working multiple jobs through college and the pressure of helping support family members who still depended on him. There was no self-pity in his voice, no attempt to gain sympathy, just honesty. As Amelia listened, she realized something surprising. Most people spent their conversations trying to convince others they were impressive. Ethan seemed completely comfortable being himself. That quality fascinated her. Because in a world filled with carefully constructed images and hidden agendas, authenticity felt almost impossible to find. Meanwhile, elsewhere inside Sterling Global, another story was beginning to unfold. Victoria Hayes had spent years climbing the corporate ladder. Smart, ambitious, and fiercely competitive, she viewed every relationship through the lens of opportunity. To Victoria, success belonged to those willing to take risks others avoided. She had earned her position through determination and strategic thinking. Yet, despite all her accomplishments, she remained hungry for more. It started with a small observation. Victoria noticed that Amy Collins didn't behave like other cleaning staff. The differences were subtle, almost invisible: the way she carried herself, the confidence hidden beneath her quiet demeanor, the vocabulary she occasionally used. The way senior executives sometimes reacted strangely around her without understanding why. At first, Victoria dismissed the feeling. But curiosity has a way of growing, especially when ambitious people sense that something valuable may be hidden nearby. Over the next several weeks, Victoria paid closer attention. And the more she observed Amy Collins, the more questions she had. Questions that refused to disappear. Questions that eventually pushed her toward a decision that would change the course of everyone's lives. While Victoria searched for answers, Amelia and Ethan continued growing closer. Their friendship developed naturally, without pressure, without expectations. without either of them realizing how important those moments would eventually become. One rainy evening, after most employees had left the building, a power outage briefly affected several floors. Emergency lights illuminated the hallways in a soft glow. Employees gathered near windows while maintenance crews worked to restore service. During the unexpected delay, Amelia and Ethan found themselves talking again. The conversation moved beyond small talk. For the first time, they discussed fears, regrets, dreams, the future. Ethan admitted that despite years of hard work, he sometimes wondered whether he was falling behind compared to others his age. Amelia understood that feeling more than he could possibly imagine. The irony almost made her smile. One of the richest women in America was listening to a middle-class project manager worry about financial success, and for a moment, she wished she could tell him the truth. She wished she could explain that wealth solved far fewer problems than people believed, but revealing her identity would end the experiment, so she remained silent. What Amelia didn't know was that Ethan had his own growing secret. He was beginning to care about her, not the version the world knew, not Amelia Sterling, not the billionaire heiress, but Amy Collins. The woman he believed worked long hours cleaning office buildings. The woman who listened without judgment. The woman who seemed to understand him better than anyone else. And as those feelings deepened, the risk surrounding Amelia's hidden identity grew greater with every passing day. Because while Ethan was slowly falling in love, Victoria Hayes was getting closer to the truth, and soon, she would uncover a discovery so explosive that it could destroy Amelia's carefully constructed world in a single moment. Victoria Hayes had built her entire career on one simple belief. People always left clues. No matter how careful they were, no matter how convincing their story appeared, everyone eventually revealed something they never intended others to see. Over the years, that instinct had helped her secure promotions, close important deals, and stay several steps ahead of competitors. It was the reason she trusted her suspicions about Amy Collins, even when nobody else seemed to notice anything unusual. The cleaning contractor, who quietly moved through Sterling Global's hallways, simply didn't fit the profile Victoria expected. The inconsistencies were small, but they continued to accumulate. Amy carried herself with confidence that couldn't easily be explained. She spoke with an education that seemed out of place. She understood business terminology that most temporary staff would never encounter. And whenever senior executives crossed paths with her, there were moments, brief but unmistakable moments, when their reactions suggested they knew more than they should. The mystery consumed Victoria's attention. At first, she attempted to dismiss it. After all, she had larger priorities. Quarterly reports were approaching. Several major projects required oversight. Her own ambitions within Sterling Global demanded constant focus. Yet every time she saw Amy Collins walking through the building, the questions returned. Eventually, curiosity evolved into determination. Victoria began reviewing employee records. Nothing unusual appeared. Amy Collins existed on paper exactly as she should. Employment history, identification records, references. Everything seemed legitimate, but something still felt wrong. That feeling pushed Victoria toward a decision she normally reserved for situations involving significant financial stakes. She hired a private investigator. The investigator's assignment sounded simple: verify Amy Collins' background, confirm her history, find out why she seemed so different. Within days, the investigator began reporting unusual findings. The references listed in Amy's employment file were difficult to verify. Several details appeared authentic on the surface, but became less convincing upon closer examination. Then came the first major breakthrough: a photograph, an old charity gala image. Thousands of attendees had appeared in the background. Most faces were barely recognizable. Yet after careful analysis, one image seemed impossible to ignore. Standing beside Richard Sterling was a younger Amelia Sterling. And despite the elegant dress, expensive jewelry, and glamorous appearance, the resemblance was undeniable. The investigator stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he compared it to a recent image of Amy Collins. The same eyes, the same facial structure, the same smile. Only the hairstyle, clothing, and presentation were different. When Victoria received the report, she read it 3 times before fully accepting what she was seeing. Amy Collins wasn't Amy Collins. Amy Collins was Amelia Sterling, the billionaire heiress, the future owner of Sterling Global. the woman whose wealth was measured in billions. For several moments, Victoria simply sat in silence because the implications were staggering. One of the richest women in America had been secretly working as a cleaner inside her own company. The question wasn't whether this revelation mattered. The question was why, and more importantly, how could Victoria use it? As that thought entered her mind, opportunity immediately followed. Victoria understood power. Information was power, secrets were power, and this secret was unlike anything she had ever encountered. If handled correctly, it could elevate her status within the company. It could strengthen her influence. It could place her closer to the executive authority she had spent years pursuing. But before taking action, she needed to understand one thing. Why was Amelia Sterling pretending to be Amy Collins? The answer arrived sooner than expected. One evening, while reviewing security footage connected to a separate matter, Victoria noticed something interesting. Amy Collins and Ethan Carter, talking, laughing, sharing coffee, walking through hallways together. Nothing inappropriate, nothing scandalous. Yet the frequency of those interactions immediately stood out. As Victoria continued reviewing footage from previous weeks, a pattern emerged. Ethan Carter appeared repeatedly. Lunch conversations, late evening discussions, friendly encounters throughout the building. And suddenly everything began making sense. Amelia wasn't hiding because of business. She was hiding because of love. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Now she finally understood. The billionaire heiress was conducting an experiment, and Ethan Carter was at the center of it. Meanwhile, Ethan remained completely unaware of the storm quietly forming around him. His feelings for Amy Collins continued growing stronger. At first, he had dismissed their connection as friendship, then admiration, then concern whenever he didn't see her around the building. But eventually, he could no longer deny the truth. He looked forward to every conversation, every unexpected encounter, every smile. And for a man who prided himself on being practical, those emotions felt both exciting and unsettling. One Friday evening, after another long work week, Ethan invited Amelia to a small neighborhood restaurant several miles from company headquarters. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress, just a quiet place known for good food and honest conversation. Amelia almost declined. Part of her feared becoming emotionally attached. The deeper their relationship grew, the more painful the eventual truth could become. Yet another part of her desperately wanted to experience what she had been searching for her entire life. A connection free from money, free from expectations, free from manipulation, so she accepted that dinner would become one of the most important nights of her life. For nearly 3 hours they talked about family, about childhood memories, about disappointment, about hope, and somewhere during that conversation, Amelia found herself forgetting the experiment. For the first time in years, she wasn't evaluating someone. She wasn't searching for hidden motives. She wasn't wondering what they wanted from her. She was simply enjoying being understood. When the evening ended, Ethan walked her to her car. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The silence felt meaningful, comfortable. Then Ethan smiled. "I'm really glad I met you, Amy." The words stayed with Amelia long after she drove away, because they were simple, honest, and completely sincere. But while Amelia replayed that conversation in her mind, Victoria Hayes was finalizing a plan. She had no intention of revealing the truth immediately. That would be wasteful. Secrets this valuable required timing, patience, strategy. Victoria wanted maximum impact, maximum advantage. She began quietly collecting evidence, photographs, documents, reports, anything that connected Amy Collins to Amelia Sterling. Every piece strengthened her position. Every discovery increased the value of what she knew. The problem was that Victoria underestimated one thing: Richard Sterling. Because while she believed she was the only person conducting an investigation inside Sterling Global, Richard Sterling had been conducting one of his own. And the informations he was uncovering about Victoria Hayes would soon change everything. What neither woman realized was that events had already been set into motion. Events that would collide during a company celebration attended by hundreds of employees, executives, investors, and journalists. A night that would begin as a routine corporate event and end with a revelation so shocking that silence would spread through the room before anyone could even process what they had just witnessed. And at the center of it all would be Amelia Sterling, Ethan Carter, and Victoria Hayes. each carrying secrets, each believing they understood what was coming, and each completely unprepared for what would happen next. As the weeks passed, Amelia Sterling found herself caught between two very different worlds. During the day, she remained Amy Collins, the quiet cleaning contractor who moved unnoticed through the halls of Sterling Global. But every evening, when she returned to her penthouse overlooking the city skyline, reality waited for her. The contrast was becoming harder to ignore. In one world, people overlooked her. In the other, people competed for her attention. In one world, conversations felt genuine. In the other, every interaction seemed carefully calculated. More than once, Amelia found herself wondering whether she could continue living this double life. The experiment had already revealed more than she expected. Yet walking away now meant walking away from Ethan Carter before discovering whether what existed between them was real. For Richard Sterling, the situation was becoming equally complicated. His original intention had been simple: help his daughter find clarity, help her understand who could be trusted. What he hadn't anticipated was how deeply involved she would become emotionally. During their private conversations, Amelia spoke about Ethan more frequently than she realized. Richard noticed every detail: the way her voice changed when she mentioned him, the way she smiled while describing their conversations, the way she defended him whenever doubts surfaced. It reminded him of something he hadn't seen in years: hope. But Richard's responsibilities extended beyond his daughter's happiness. Over the previous several months, he had quietly launched an internal review of Sterling Global's leadership structure. The project was known only to a small circle of trusted advisors. While Amelia evaluated character from the ground level, Richard evaluated integrity from the executive level. Together, their separate investigations were exposing truths neither expected to find. And one name continued appearing throughout Richard's reports: Victoria Hayes. At first, the findings seemed relatively minor: questionable expense approvals, suspicious vendor relationships, financial decisions that consistently benefited certain individuals. None of it appeared serious enough to trigger immediate action. Yet, the deeper investigators looked, the more concerning the pattern became. Richard had spent decades building Sterling Global. He understood that corruption rarely arrived all at once. It usually started with small compromises, small shortcuts, small decisions people convinced themselves were harmless. Victoria's file was growing larger every week. Meanwhile, Victoria believed she was gaining control. Knowing Amelia's secret gave her confidence. She no longer viewed the billionaire heiress as untouchable. Instead, she saw someone vulnerable, someone carrying a secret relationship that could easily be turned into a public scandal. Victoria had already imagined how events might unfold. At the right moment, she would reveal everything: Amelia's hidden identity, the deception, the relationship with Ethan Carter. The embarrassment alone would be enormous. But Victoria hoped for something even greater. She wanted leverage. What Victoria didn't understand was that secrets often become dangerous for the people holding them, especially when they underestimate everyone else involved. One afternoon, Amelia and Ethan found themselves sitting together on a quiet bench outside company headquarters. The weather was unusually pleasant, and employees filled nearby walkways enjoying their lunch breaks. For several minutes, they spoke about ordinary things: work, family, weekend plans. Then Ethan suddenly became serious. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Amelia felt her stomach tighten. Questions had become increasingly dangerous. "What is it?" she asked carefully. Ethan looked down briefly before meeting her eyes. "Have you ever felt like you're hiding part of yourself from the world?" For a moment, Amelia nearly laughed at the irony. If only he knew. Every day, she concealed one of the biggest secrets imaginable. Yet Ethan wasn't accusing her of anything. His expression suggested he was talking about himself. So she listened. Ethan explained that throughout his life, he had often felt pressure to meet expectations, to become successful, to prove himself, to carry responsibilities without complaining. Sometimes, he admitted, he worried that people only saw the version of him he presented rather than the person he actually was. The confession touched Amelia deeply because she understood exactly what he meant. The difference was that Ethan's hidden struggles came from responsibility. Hers came from privilege. By the time their conversation ended, Amelia knew something important. She wasn't just falling for Ethan Carter, she was already in love with him. The realization frightened her, because love complicated everything. The longer she waited to reveal the truth, the greater the risk became. But revealing the truth could destroy the very relationship she was trying to protect. Days later, another development intensified her concerns. The annual Sterling Global Legacy Gala was officially announced. The event represented one of the most important nights on the company calendar. Executives, investors, journalists, business leaders, and employees from across the country would attend. Awards would be presented. Strategic announcements would be made. Richard Sterling himself would deliver the keynote address. For most employees, the gala was simply another corporate celebration. For Amelia, it immediately felt dangerous. Something about it unsettled her. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps it was fear, or perhaps part of her already sensed that events were moving toward an unavoidable collision. As preparations continued, Victoria finalized plans of her own. Every document had been organized, every photograph prepared, every piece of evidence ready. She intended to reveal Amelia's true identity publicly. Not privately, not discreetly, publicly, in front of everyone. She wanted maximum impact, maximum humiliation, maximum attention, and as the date approached, Victoria grew increasingly confident that she controlled the future. What she couldn't see was that Richard Sterling had already received a complete, investigative report regarding her activities, and the contents of that report were devastating. The findings stretched back years. Manipulated contracts, undisclosed financial relationships, internal misconduct, abuse of authority. Evidence that connected Victoria to decisions capable of severely damaging Sterling Global's reputation if exposed publicly. Richard read every page carefully. By the time he reached the final document, his decision was made. Victoria Hayes had no idea that while she prepared to expose someone else's secret, her own career was standing on the edge of collapse. The night of the Legacy Gala finally arrived. Hundreds of guests filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room. Live music echoed through elegant surroundings. Executives mingled with investors. Journalists prepared cameras. Employees celebrated milestones and achievements. Everything appeared perfect. Amelia entered quietly, wearing an elegant gown that transformed her appearance completely. Anyone who knew Amy Collins would struggle to recognize her immediately. Yet despite the glamour surrounding her, she felt anxious. Her attentions remained fixed on one person, Ethan Carter. This would be the first time he had ever attended an event of this scale. And this would be the first time he would see her as Amelia Sterling. Not Amy Collins, not the woman he believed he knew, the real Amelia. Across the ballroom, Ethan arrived moments later. He looked uncomfortable among the wealth and influence surrounding him. But his eyes immediately began searching the room. Searching for Amy, the woman he hoped to see. The woman he cared about. The woman who had changed his life without realizing it. He had no idea that within the next hour, everything he believed about her would be shattered. And as guests settled into their seats for the evening's presentations, Victoria Hayes quietly moved into position. The documents were ready. The evidence was prepared. The opportunities she had waited for had finally arrived. What happened next would leave the entire ballroom frozen in disbelief. And before the night was over, Ethan Carter would learn the truth about Amelia Sterling in the most shocking way imaginable. The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed the moment Richard Sterling stepped onto the stage. Conversations faded. Glasses were set down. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the man who had built Sterling Global from a small regional company into a business empire worth billions. For decades, Richard had commanded rooms without raising his voice. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. Yet on this particular evening, there was something different about him. Something more reflective, more deliberate. Amelia noticed it immediately. Seated several rows away, she watched her father carefully. She knew his health had been declining. She knew the future of Sterling Global weighed heavily on his mind. What she didn't know was whether tonight would include any major announcements. Richard had shared very little with her in recent weeks. Whenever she asked about company matters, he simply smiled and told her to trust the process. Across the room, Ethan Carter sat among department managers and project leaders. He listened respectfully as Richard spoke about the company's history, its achievements, and the thousands of employees who had contributed to its success. Ethan had always admired Richard Sterling from a distance. To him, the billionaire founder represented discipline, perseverance, and vision. Like most employees, he had never imagined his life would somehow become connected to the Sterling family. Not yet. Not in the way it was about to. As Richard continued speaking, Victoria Hayes remained calm, confident, patient. She knew her moment was approaching. For weeks, she had imagined this scene. The surprise, the shock, the confusion spreading through the room. By the end of the evening, everyone would know the truth, and Victoria intended to be the person who revealed it. The first part of the gala proceeded smoothly. Awards were presented, milestones were celebrated, executives delivered short speeches, laughter filled the room. To an outside observer, everything appeared normal. Then the schedule reached the segment Victoria had been waiting for, a presentation recognizing employee contributions. As names appeared on large screens throughout the ballroom, Victoria quietly stood from her seat. At first, nobody paid attention. Why would they? She was a senior executive. Standing during a corporate event wasn't unusual, but when she began walking toward the stage with a folder in her hand, several people exchanged curious glances. Richard noticed, Amelia noticed, and somewhere deep inside, both immediately sensed something was wrong. Victoria approached the microphone. The room gradually fell silent. She smiled politely, then she began speaking. I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone whose contributions to this company have gone unnoticed for quite some time. The statement sounded harmless enough. Several audience members even nodded. But Amelia's heart suddenly started racing because she knew that tone. She knew that smile. And she knew Victoria had discovered something. What I'm about to share, Victoria continued, will come as a surprise to many people in this room. Whispers began spreading. Confused expressions appeared across the audience. Ethan looked toward the stage, uncertain where this was heading. Then Victoria reached into her folder. She removed a photograph, and everything changed. This woman, she said, while displaying an image of Amy Collins, is not who she claims to be. A wave of confusion moved through the crowd. Employees stared at the screen. Some recognized Amy immediately. Others looked puzzled. Victoria continued, for months, she has worked inside this company under a false identity. Now the room was completely silent. Amelia could feel every heartbeat. Ethan frowned. His attention remained fixed on the photograph. Victoria took a breath, then delivered the revelation she had spent weeks preparing. Amy Collins is actually Amelia Sterling. The words seemed to echo throughout the ballroom. For several seconds, nobody reacted. Not because they didn't hear her, because they couldn't process what she had just said. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the disbelief. Employees looked from the screen to Amelia, from Amelia to Richard, from Richard back to the stage. Some shook their heads, others stared in stunned silence. Several people actually stood from their seats, trying to understand what was happening. Ethan felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. His eyes slowly moved across the ballroom until they found Amelia, the elegant woman seated near the front. The woman he had assumed was one of the company's owners. The woman who looked nothing like Amy Collins, and yet, at the same time, exactly like her. The realization hit him with overwhelming force. Every conversation, every lunch, every laugh, every shared moment, Amy Collins, Amelia Sterling, the same person. For a brief moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. Questions flooded his mind faster than he could process them. Why? How long? Was any of it real? Had she been studying him, testing him, judging him? The emotions arrived all at once: shock, confusion, embarrassment, hurt. Because regardless of her reasons, one fact remained undeniable. The woman he trusted had lied to him. Across the room, Amelia wanted to explain everything. She wanted to stand up, walk over to Ethan, tell him why she had done it, tell him how much he meant to her. But before she could move, another voice interrupted the chaos. Richard Sterling. The billionaire founder slowly rose from his seat. The room immediately quieted. Victoria smiled slightly. She believed she had won. She expected Richard to be furious with Amelia, perhaps even embarrassed. Instead, Richard walked calmly toward the stage. His expression revealed nothing. When he reached the microphone, he looked directly at Victoria, then at the audience, then finally at Ethan. What he said next would completely change the direction of the evening. Victoria is correct about one thing, Richard said. That is Amelia Sterling. Another murmur spread through the room. Richard waited for silence, then continued, "And everything she has done was approved by me." The room froze again. Victoria's confident expression disappeared instantly. This wasn't how the story was supposed to unfold. Richard continued speaking. "Several months ago, I asked my daughter to participate in an experiment. Now every person in attendance listened carefully. For years, Amelia struggled with a question many people in positions of wealth eventually face. How do you know who genuinely cares about you when everyone knows your name, your influence, and your fortune?" No one interrupted. No one moved. The ballroom felt suspended in time, so she entered this company anonymously. Richard's voice remained steady, not to deceive people for personal gain, not to manipulate anyone, but to understand the character of those around her. Victoria immediately realized something was wrong, very wrong, because Richard didn't sound defensive, he sounded prepared. And that meant he knew more than she expected. Then Richard reached into his own folder, a folder much thicker than Victoria's. A folder containing months of investigative findings. The expression on Victoria's face changed the moment she saw it, because for the first time that evening, she understood that she might not be the only person who had been conducting an investigation. And the next few minutes would reveal secrets far more damaging than Amelia Sterling's hidden identity. Secrets that could bring an executive career crashing down in front of everyone watching. As the room sat in complete silence, Richard opened the folder, and Victoria Hayes suddenly realized she was no longer controlling the story. She had become part of it. The confidence that had carried Victoria Hayes onto the stage vanished almost instantly. Just minutes earlier, she had believed she was orchestrating the most dramatic moment of the evening. She imagined herself exposing a secret that would leave everyone stunned. Instead, she now stood beneath the bright lights of the ballroom with hundreds of eyes fixed on her, while Richard Sterling calmly held a folder containing information she had never expected anyone to uncover. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Richard looked down at the documents in his hand before raising his eyes toward the audience. "Over the past year," he began, "I have spent a great deal of time thinking about the future of Sterling Global." His voice remained calm, measured, controlled. "The future of a company is not determined by its buildings. It is not determined by its profits. It is determined by the character of the people trusted to lead it." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. No one knew where this was going, but everyone could feel the tension. Richard slowly turned another page. "As part of that process, I authorized a confidential review of company leadership." Victoria's stomach tightened. She immediately understood what he meant. And she understood something else. If Richard was discussing the review publicly, the findings must be serious. Very serious. The audience listened in complete silence. "Most of our leaders passed that review with distinction," Richard continued. "They demonstrated integrity, accountability, and professionalism." Then his expression hardened, but unfortunately, not everyone did. The room became even quieter. If such a thing were possible. Victoria felt every heartbeat, every second, every pair of eyes watching her. Richard finally looked directly at her. For months, evidence has been collected regarding decisions that violated company policy. The first document appeared on the giant screen behind him. Gasps spread through the audience. Financial records, approval signatures, transaction histories. Victoria's name appeared repeatedly. Her face immediately lost color. Richard continued. "These findings include unauthorized vendor arrangements, conflicts of interest, concealed financial relationships, and misuse of executive authority." More documents appeared. Then more, each one strengthening the case, each one making denial more difficult. The audience watched in disbelief. Executives whispered among themselves. Investors stared at the screens. Journalists quickly began taking notes. For the first time that evening, Amelia almost forgot about her own situation. Even she had no idea the investigation had uncovered this much. Victoria attempted to speak. "Richard, this isn't the time or place." "It is exactly the time and place," Richard interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to stop her immediately. "For months, you've been preparing to expose my daughter." Victoria said nothing, because there was nothing she could say. Richard continued. "You believed you were revealing the truth." He paused. "The truth is important." Another pause, "But the complete truth is even more important." The room remained completely silent. Then Richard delivered the statement that changed everything. The board of directors reviewed these findings earlier this week. Several board members nodded from their seats. The decision was unanimous. Victoria's eyes widened. She already knew what was coming, but hearing it would make it real. Effective immediately, Victoria Hayes is terminated from Sterling Global. The announcement struck the room like a thunderclap. Some employees gasped. Others simply stared. Victoria looked frozen, as though her mind couldn't fully process what had happened. Just 30 minutes earlier, she believed she was ascending. Now her entire career was collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses. Security personnel quietly approached the stage. No dramatic confrontation occurred, no shouting, no argument, only silence. Victoria looked around the room one final time, then at Richard, then at Amelia. For a brief moment, anger flashed across her face, not because she had been exposed, because she had lost. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The ballroom remained silent until she disappeared through the exit. Only then did people begin speaking again. Whispers filled the room. Questions spread everywhere. Yet despite everything that had happened, Amelia wasn't focused on Victoria. She wasn't thinking about the investigation, or the company, or the audience. Her attention remained fixed on one person, Ethan Carter, because while Victoria's secrets had been exposed, the damage caused by Amelia's own secret remained unresolved. Ethan still sat several rows back, motionless, his expression unreadable, and somehow that frightened Amelia more than anything else that had happened all night. A few moments later, Richard concluded his remarks. The event officially ended. Guests slowly stood. Conversations exploded throughout the ballroom. Reporters rushed toward executives. Employees gathered into groups. Everyone wanted to discuss the shocking events they had just witnessed. But Amelia only wanted one thing: to speak with Ethan. She moved through the crowd as quickly as possible, searching, looking, hoping. But when she finally reached the area where he had been sitting, his seat was empty. Her heart sank immediately. She searched nearby hallways, the lobby, the entrance. Nothing. Ethan was gone, without a word, without an explanation, without giving her a chance to tell him the truth herself. That night became one of the longest nights of Amelia Sterling's life. She barely slept. Again and again, she replayed every conversation they had shared, every moment, every memory, and every lie. Because regardless of her intentions, Ethan had every reason to feel betrayed. The next morning she called him. No answer. She sent a message. No response. Another message. Still nothing. Days passed, then a week, then another. The silence remained. For the first time since beginning the experiment, Amelia wondered whether she had made a terrible mistake. Not pretending to be Amy Collins, falling in love. Because now she risked losing the one person who had truly cared about her before knowing who she was. Richard watched his daughter struggle through those weeks with quiet concern. One evening, he found her sitting alone on the balcony of her penthouse. The city lights stretched endlessly below. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Richard sat beside her. "You love him. It wasn't a question." Amelia nodded. "Yes." Richard looked out toward the skyline. "Then give him time." Amelia sighed. "What if time doesn't change anything?" Richard smiled sadly. "Then at least you'll know his decision was honest." The words stayed with her, because honesty had been the entire purpose of the experiment from the beginning. She wanted truth, even when the truth hurt, especially when the truth hurt. 3 weeks after the gala, Amelia arrived home after another exhausting day. The company had survived the scandal. The board had implemented reforms. Employees continued discussing the events of the gala. Life was slowly returning to normal, at least on the surface. As she entered her apartment, her assistant handed her an envelope. No return address. Amelia frowned. Handwritten letters were rare, almost non-existent. She accepted the envelope and immediately noticed the handwriting. Her heart skipped, because she recognized it, Ethan Carter. For several seconds, she simply stared at the envelope, afraid to open it, afraid not to. Then finally, she unfolded the letter, and as her eyes moved across the first few lines, tears immediately began forming. Because after weeks of silence, Ethan Carter was finally ready to tell her what he truly felt. And what he wrote would change the course of both their lives forever. Amelia Sterling sat motionless in her living room, holding the letter with both hands. For weeks, she had imagined countless possibilities. Maybe Ethan Carter would never contact her again. Maybe he would send a brief message wishing her well before disappearing from her life forever. Maybe he would tell her that the deception was too great to overcome. Every scenario had crossed her mind at least once. Yet as she looked at the familiar handwriting on the page, she realized something important. This wasn't a text message. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a hurried response sent in the middle of frustration. Ethan had taken the time to write. That alone meant something. Slowly, Amelia began reading. The first lines were difficult, painfully honest. Ethan admitted that the night of the gala had left him feeling humiliated, confused, and hurt. He described sitting in the ballroom while the truth unfolded around him. One moment, he believed he knew exactly who Amy Collins was. The next moment, he realized that nearly everything he thought he understood had been turned upside down. Amelia felt tears gathering as she continued reading. Because Ethan wasn't attacking her, he wasn't trying to punish her. He was simply telling the truth, the same truth she had wanted from everyone else, the same truth she had spent her entire life searching for. Ethan explained that for days after the gala, he questioned every memory they shared, every conversation, every laugh, every personal story. He wondered whether he had been part of an experiment rather than a relationship. He wondered whether the woman he cared about had ever truly existed. Then came the part that made Amelia stop reading for a moment. Ethan wrote that eventually he realized something. The person he loved wasn't Amy Collins, and it wasn't Amelia Sterling. The person he loved was the woman underneath both names. The woman who listened when he spoke. The woman who cared about people. The woman who understood loneliness despite living a life most people could never imagine. He admitted that the lie hurt, but after weeks of reflection, he had finally understood why she did it. Fear, not greed, not manipulation. Fear. Fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. Fear of making another mistake. Fear of trusting the wrong person. As Amelia reached the final page, her hands were trembling. The last paragraph was short, simple, and impossible to forget. It read, "If you're willing, I'd like to see you again. Not Amy Collins, not the billionaire heiress Amelia Sterling, just you. Because after everything that's happened, that's still the person I miss." Amelia read those words 3 times, then 4, then 5. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. The next morning, she called the number written at the bottom of the letter. Ethan answered on the second ring. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt strangely familiar. Not awkward, just emotional. Finally, Ethan laughed softly. "I wasn't sure you'd call," Amelia smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd write." For several seconds, neither knew what to say. Then Ethan asked a question. A simple question, the kind that changes lives. "Would you like to meet?" Amelia closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." The meeting took place 2 days later, not at a luxury restaurant, not inside Sterling Global, not at one of Amelia's properties. Instead, they met at the exact place where their friendship had quietly begun. A small coffee shop a few blocks from company headquarters. The same place where they had shared countless conversations when she was still Amy Collins. Ethan arrived first. Amelia saw him through the window before entering. For a moment, memories flooded back. The lunches, the jokes, the long discussions about life. Everything that had led them here. When she finally stepped inside, Ethan stood. Neither rushed forward. Neither knew exactly how to begin. Then Amelia spoke first. "I'm sorry," the words came naturally, without hesitation, without excuses. Ethan nodded. "I know." She looked down briefly. "I should have told you sooner. You probably should have." Another pause. Then Ethan smiled. "But I probably should have given you a chance to explain before disappearing." Amelia laughed through tears. And suddenly the tension that had existed between them for weeks began fading away. For the next several hours, they talked. Really talked. No hidden identities, no secrets, no experiments, no walls. For the first time, everything was completely honest. Amelia answered every question. Ethan shared every frustration. Together, they worked through the confusion that had separated them. By the time they left the coffee shop, something had changed. Not because the past had disappeared, because they had finally faced it. Months passed. Their relationship grew stronger than ever. Without the pressure of secrets, trust slowly replaced uncertainty. Ethan adjusted to a reality he never expected. Dating one of the wealthiest women in America came with challenges. Media attention increased. Public interest followed them everywhere. But none of those things changed the foundation of their relationship. Because unlike everyone else who knew Amelia Sterling first, and then met the person underneath, Ethan had experienced the opposite. He fell in love with the person before he ever knew about the fortune, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Sterling Global continued evolving. The reforms Richard Sterling implemented strengthened company culture, employee satisfaction improved, leadership became more accountable. Many workers never forgot the lessons learned from Amelia's undercover experience. Stories about Amy Collins became part of company history. New employees heard them from veterans who had witnessed the events firsthand. And whenever someone questioned whether character truly mattered, those stories resurfaced again. Nearly a year after the gala, Richard Sterling invited Amelia and Ethan to dinner. The evening felt different from previous family gatherings. Richard appeared healthier, more relaxed, more at peace. As the meal continued, he spent most of the evening listening rather than speaking, watching rather than advising, observing rather than leading. At one point, Ethan stepped away briefly, leaving Amelia alone with her father. Richard smiled. "You know, when I suggested this experiment, finding a husband wasn't actually my primary goal." Amelia laughed. "It wasn't?" Richard shook his head. "No." She looked surprised. "Then what was?" Richard leaned back in his chair. "I wanted you to discover that your value was never connected to your money." Amelia sat quietly. Richard continued. "You spent years worrying about whether people loved you for the wrong reasons." He smiled warmly. "But the truth is that the right people eventually reveal themselves." Amelia looked across the room where Ethan was returning to the table, and for the first time, she completely understood what her father meant. Several months later, Ethan asked Amelia to meet him after work. He was unusually nervous, unusually quiet, and Amelia immediately suspected something was happening. The location surprised her. It wasn't a luxury venue, it wasn't a private resort, it wasn't anywhere associated with wealth. Instead, Ethan brought her to a quiet hallway inside Sterling Global, a hallway that most employees rarely noticed, near an old janitor's storage room, the exact area where their story had truly begun. Amelia immediately recognized it, and she immediately began smiling. Ethan looked around nervously, then laughed. "I had a whole speech prepared." "You did? An excellent speech. What happened to it?" Ethan smiled. "I forgot all of it." They both laughed, then his expression became serious. He reached into his pocket and slowly lowered himself onto one knee. For a brief moment, Amelia couldn't breathe, because suddenly every step of the journey flashed through her mind. The loneliness, the heartbreak, the disguise, the cleaning cart, the first conversation, the gala, the letter, everything. All leading to this moment, Ethan looked up at her, and with complete sincerity, asked the question she had spent years hoping one day to hear from someone she could truly trust. The answer came before he even finished speaking, and as tears filled her eyes, Amelia Sterling finally said yes. For a moment, neither Amelia Sterling nor Ethan Carter spoke. The hallway seemed frozen in time. The same hallway where employees once rushed past without noticing a woman pushing a cleaning cart. The same hallway where Ethan had casually stopped to help someone he believed was an ordinary worker. The same hallway where a friendship quietly began. And now, it had become the place where two lives would officially come together. Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man kneeling in front of her. Not because he was offering her wealth, not because he was offering her status, not because he was offering her a future connected to billions of dollars. He was offering something far more valuable: trust, the very thing she thought she might never find. When Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, both of them laughed through their emotions. The proposal wasn't perfect. There were no cameras, no reporters, no dramatic audience, no elaborate production. And that was exactly why Amelia loved it. Because every important moment in their relationship had been built on authenticity rather than appearances. The engagement quickly became one of the most discussed stories within Sterling Global. Employees who had witnessed different stages of Amelia's undercover journey could hardly believe how everything had unfolded. Many remembered Amy Collins, the quiet cleaner who politely greeted everyone, the woman who listened more than she spoke, the employee most people barely noticed. Now they understood why those months had become such an important chapter in company history. Yet the reactions inside Sterling Global revealed something else, something Amelia found deeply meaningful. The people who genuinely cared about her reacted exactly the same way they always had. They congratulated her. They celebrated her happiness. They wished her well. The people who had treated her with kindness, when she appeared to have nothing, treated her with kindness now. And that realization confirmed everything she had learned during the experiment. Character rarely changes when circumstances change. It simply becomes easier to see. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling watched the engagement unfold with quiet satisfaction. For the first time in years, he seemed lighter. The burden he had carried for so long was beginning to ease. His concerns about Amelia's future had never been about money. He knew she would always be financially secure. His concern had been loneliness, the kind of loneliness that wealth often fails to solve. Now, as he watched Amelia and Ethan build a life together, he finally felt confident that she wouldn't have to face the future alone. Several months later, wedding preparations were underway. Predictably, many people expected an extravagant celebration. After all, Amelia Sterling had access to resources most people could barely imagine. Luxury venues across the world were available. Private islands, historic states, five-star resorts. The options seemed endless, but once again, Amelia surprised everyone. Because she and Ethan wanted something different. They wanted a wedding that reflected the journey that brought them together, not the fortune attached to her name. The guest list remained relatively small: close friends, family, trusted colleagues, people who had played meaningful roles in their lives. The focus wasn't on creating headlines. The focus was on creating memories. And when the wedding day finally arrived, it felt less like a celebrity event and more like a celebration of genuine connection. Richard Sterling walked his daughter down the aisle. For a brief moment, memories flooded his mind. He remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle, helping with school projects, watching her graduate, comforting her after heartbreak, guiding her through disappointment, and now, watching her begin a new chapter. By the time he reached the end of the aisle, even Richard struggled to hide his emotions. Ethan stood waiting. The same man who had once helped pick up cleaning supplies, without realizing he was speaking to a billionaire heiress. The same man who fell in love before learning the truth. The same man who walked away when he felt betrayed, but eventually returned when he understood her reasons. As the ceremony continued, many guests found themselves reflecting on the unusual path that had brought everyone together. Because if Amelia had never disguised herself as Amy Collins, she probably never would have met Ethan. And if Ethan had treated her the way many others did, they likely never would have shared another conversation. A single act of kindness had altered the course of both their lives. The wedding concluded with applause, laughter, and more than a few tears. But the story didn't end there. In many ways, it was only beginning. Over the following year, Amelia and Ethan settled into married life. The adjustment wasn't always easy. There were challenges that came with public attention. Challenges that came with extraordinary wealth. Challenges that came with balancing personal happiness and corporate responsibility. Yet, through it all, they remained grounded by the same principles that first connected them: honesty, respect, and trust. Meanwhile, Sterling Global continued thriving. The company had changed significantly since Amelia's undercover experience. Employee feedback programs expanded. Workplace culture improved. Leadership accountability increased. People throughout the organization became more aware of how they treated others, regardless of position or title. The lessons learned during that period left a lasting impact. In fact, a surprising tradition eventually emerged. Every year, newly promoted managers attended leadership workshops discussing company values. And during those workshops, one story was always shared: the story of Amy Collins, the cleaner who wasn't really a cleaner, the billionaire heiress who disguised herself to discover the truth about people, the woman who learned that respect should never depend on status. The story became legendary inside Sterling Global. Years later, employees who had never met Amelia personally could still recite parts of it. And perhaps the most remarkable part was this: the story wasn't remembered because of the money. It wasn't remembered because of the deception. It wasn't remembered because of the scandal involving Victoria Hayes. It was remembered because it reminded people of something important. You never truly know who you're standing beside. The person you ignore today may hold extraordinary influence tomorrow. The person you dismiss may be fighting battles you know nothing about. The person you underestimate may ultimately change your life. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after the wedding, a young employee noticed something unusual while walking through Sterling Global headquarters. A woman was helping maintenance staff prepare an area for renovations. She was carrying supplies, asking questions, chatting with employees from different departments. The young employee recognized her immediately. Amelia Sterling. Curious, he approached and asked why she still spent time doing work most executives would never consider. Amelia smiled, then gave an answer that perfectly captured everything she had learned. Because sometimes the best way to understand people is to stand where nobody expects you to stand. The employee never forgot those words, and neither would anyone else who heard the story. Because in the end, this was never really a story about billions of dollars. It was never really a story about inheritance. And it was never really a story about corporate power. It was a story about human nature, about how people treat others when they believe there is nothing to gain, about the difference between appearance and character, about the courage required to trust after heartbreak. And perhaps most importantly, it was a story about discovering that the right person doesn't love you because of what you have. They love you because of who you are. Amelia Sterling spent years searching for that truth. She searched through luxury parties, through failed relationships, through painful disappointments, only to find it in the most unexpected place imaginable: a company hallway, a cleaning cart, and a man named Ethan Carter who chose kindness before he knew her name. Now here's a question for you. If you were in Ethan Carter's position, would you have forgiven Amelia Sterling after learning the truth? Or would the secret have been too much to overcome? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story may challenge everything you think you know about trust, loyalty, and love.